All right, hello and welcome. Welcome to the Electric Car Hangout. And we got some street racing outside, and I left the window open. So, great start tonight. But wanted to share a review of Walter Isaacson's biography on Elon Musk. And so, this is my book report. Um, Working on getting another camera set up, and we'll go over there in a second. Still black. I'm going to try the good old-fashioned unplug and replug, and I realize my microphone's over there, so you're probably having a difficult time hearing me. Great start today. I haven't done one of these in a while, but wanted to jump on tonight. Even though I'm kind of taking September off to do a major art project, that's why my background is so messy, but we're getting started. Going to see if we can get that camera back. And looks like it's starting. Hello, Dennis, Aaron, and Todd. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Sorry if I'm muffled. The microphone's still over there, and I'll be headed there in just a second. So, close the window first. We've had the air conditioning off, so trying to keep it a little cooler in here before we shut everything up with the lights and everything. So, quick intro about this. I've got a ton of notes I want to get through and get all my thoughts out there, and so I will be coming back to the questions and the chat, maybe a little bit as we go, but generally I'm going to just go through my book review and take you guys along for the ride, and then I'll answer questions and things closer to the end. So, sorry if I don't acknowledge you as you join the stream. I appreciate that you're here, and feel free to have a conversation in the chat. Be respectful, but like I said, I'm going to kind of ignore that for now and get back into it. Yeah, Aaron, you need to watch that latest trip. So as I'm taking a break through most of September from YouTube, that last video was about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So plenty to chew on from a road trip perspective there. So if you want to see that, it's on the channel. And so with that, I'm going to switch cameras, head over there. The audio will get better as I get closer to the microphone, and see you there. Hi. Hope the sound's a little better over here. I'll see if I can move it even a little closer and see if I can see my notes above it. All right, so Elon Musk and the Walter Isaacson book. Have it here. It's about 600 pages, I think, something along those lines. And for me, it didn't change a ton as far as my thoughts on Elon. I'll get more into that later. But it gave a lot of clarity to stories I've heard, things I've seen people kind of mention throughout the years. So I think whether you worship Elon Musk, it's a good read to maybe go, well, he can be a pretty big jerk sometimes, and maybe that's not great. And if you hate Elon Musk, maybe it'll give you some context on things you thought you knew, but might be fleshed out a little bit more. I have read. This is the third Walter Isaacson book I've read. Both his Benjamin Franklin and his Einstein book are very good. They're maybe similar in length, but they're also about flawed people who also had some pretty big impacts. And I thought in both of these cases, I thought he treated the subjects fairly. Didn't shy away from talking about some of the stuff that might be a little more unpleasant or unflattering, but also gave them credit for the accomplishments they made. And so, having read those books in the past, I haven't read the Steve Jobs book, but having read those in the past, when I heard he was going to do an Elon biography, I thought, in my opinion, we were going to get a pretty straight shot of, how Elon is day to day, and, some context to some things behind the scenes. So, and in that aspect, I thought it did really well. Like I said, I haven't read the Steve Jobs book, but there are a couple quotes in the Elon book from Steve Jobs. So he doesn't directly compare them, but kind of shows similarities. And the sense I got when Steve Jobs was alive, that he was a brilliant, brilliant guy, very innovative, very, all the Apple innovations, Pixar, all that stuff that he kind of, created or, really pushed to get done. He wasn't really pleasant, and people didn't really like him, and he was hard to work for. And, because he's gone, I think a lot of people who, during his life would have criticized him, or did criticize him quite a bit, are, now, I used to work in corporate events, and everybody quotes Steve Jobs, all these, different sayings you've all heard a million times. And, and now that the iPhone 15 just came out, I think today is when they started actually, going out. Now, with the reveal, and then now them coming out, you have the perpetual people every year saying, oh, there's no innovation. It's all the same thing. They're so behind Android. This was, it wasn't like this when Steve Jobs was around. There was innovation, there were new things, and now Apple's treading water. So you kind of have that, because he's gone, we can lament all the good things that, he used to bring. And now that we don't have to deal with the day-to-day, maybe insufferability in some regards, to his personality, we don't have to deal with that. So now we can just remember the good things, the inspiring quotes, and all that stuff. And again, I apologize if you hear the very loud cars outside. I did shut the window, but I live in a neighborhood. But that's just something to keep in mind as I discuss this book, as we talk about Elon. I'm going to, like I said, kind of ignore the chat, so you guys have a lively discussion in there. Tell me I'm an idiot, whatever, but just be respectful to each other. That's all I really care about. But I'm going to kind of go through the book, and then, my takeaways from that, and then talk about my thoughts on Elon after having read the book, and, how have they changed, or if they've changed since then. A couple things. The book starts out, if I didn't say it already, that I think people should read this book, even if it's, you don't want to give, Elon's not getting any of this money, but if you don't like Walter Isaacson for some reason, if you don't want to give them any money, go to the library, take it out, get it on I think the library does audiobooks too. So there are different ways to get this. So one thing I kind of want to take and put in a bucket, and, kind of like the Steve Jobs comments, I want to take this part of Elon and put it in a bucket, and we're going to talk about it later. The book illustrates pretty clearly that his father was pretty abusive to him. If not physically, there isn't a lot of clarity there. It sounds like his father may have hit his mother a couple times. I don't know how frequent that was, but for any amount, it's too much. So there was a lot of abuse, humiliating, berating from his father. And it seems like Elon took the brunt of it from some of Kimball's comments. And so when we talk about, the broader picture of who Elon is, I think there's some context, or, that there's some context of someone who's gone through some pretty serious mental abuse from his father. Also physical abuse from classmates. There's some stories about a camp he went to where, there were some pretty severe physical altercations that also took place. Now, I've seen online on X, Twitter, whatever, some pushback that, well, I went to one of those camps and it wasn't that bad. But having gone to scout camp through my growing up years, we definitely knew what our troop was like, and that some of the other troops were not as well behaved or disciplined as ours. And so just because one person had a better experience there, or may have been in more of the alpha crowd, doesn't mean everybody else did there too. So there are those components. Also, it seems undiagnosed, but he's talked about it before. Other people have talked about that he is probably on the autism spectrum. He calls it Asperger's, which, depending on how you feel about certain things, it seems like there's a distinction or it's roped in. I'm not an expert on that, but there is some consideration we give to people who are, let's call it neurodivergent, and we generally give people with those issues a little bit of leeway when they don't pick up social cues, when they don't behave in a way that more typical behavior is. So I don't want to dwell on that, but I want that to stay kind of in the back of your mind, because I think we'll come back to this, but I think, we give leniency to people who have had, this past trauma and, these neurodivergencies. And at some point, when someone makes enough money, do we just stop caring about those things? And, when, Elon's struggling to get by in the early days, is it, he's a champion because he's, got this stuff, this, extra stuff he's carrying along with him. And then once he hits a certain financial threshold, then it's, no, you have to behave, the way, society says everyone else should behave. And you no longer get that because you now have a lot of money. So I think those are interesting themes to keep in the back of your mind. But I'm not going to dwell too much about that in the book, and we'll kind of tie back to it at the end. Like I said, I've really enjoyed Walter Isaacson's other books. I haven't read all of them. Like I said, I haven't read the Steve Jobs books. There's a couple other ones that I haven't had time to read yet. But really, it's in the Elon Musk book, there are really short, digestible chapters. And that really helps to keep it moving, because there are some topics I don't, like, it's good context, but I don't care about some of his personal relationships. Now that kind of ties into the overall, who he is, and it shows some of that complete callous, disassociated behavior. It shows, him being, insensitive or braggadocious in his 20s. You could say that still comes through today. But, I don't care about the TMZ aspects of his life, who he's dating, all of those kind of things. Now, reading these little chapters gives, like I said, gives you a little context, kind of puts the facets of things together. So it's worth getting to, but where I found myself stopping in the book is like, oh, here's a relationship chapter, and I'm not interested in his divorce necessarily. Now, other people might just want to know, like, tell me about his relationships and his, the girlfriends, the wives, whatever, the drama, the kids. I really don't care much about that. I care in the sense that, I feel bad for them if Elon wasn't treating them well, or if, the media was not treating them well just because, they were associated with him. So on a personal level, I care about them, but I really don't think that most of that is any of our business. I get really annoyed when people on X will repost pictures of Elon's kids, or things like that are just, that's not our business. I wouldn't like it. Jones, I have my daughter on my channel, and she's, in the public. Just the last weekend, we went up to Duluth for an event, and so, somebody came up and was like, "Hey, I know you. You're famous," and it was cute and sweet. But I wouldn't like it if people started making memes and posts about my child, and I think that's a little weird. So that's an X thing. That's not, like, everything in the book is pretty well focused on giving you a better picture of Elon, and he's Walter Isaacson did a phenomenal job interviewing family, ex-wives, girlfriends, his mother, people like Jeff Bezos and other people that you might consider rivals. Some of the early founders of Tesla that, they've kind of butted heads over the years. Walter interviewed them too. So you do get it's not just Elon, telling his side of the story. You get some context, and like I said, there's plenty of. But again, we're kind of getting further about the book. Like I said, the chapters are short and digestible. Even the parts I didn't really care about, like most of the Twitter stuff, I don't care that much about as far as the purchasing. I've been following Elon pretty closely since 2018 when we were researching buying our Model S. And, part of the reason for me joining Twitter was to, get info straight from Elon, because there are so many Tesla YouTube channels and, Twitter accounts that are, here's what's happening in the world of Elon Musk today. It's like, well, just, follow him and you'll know. Or, follow the company's official channels and you'll be pretty well up to speed. there are some good channels. I'm not dismissing that, but like the reason I joined Twitter in the first place was to get it straight from the horse's mouth. But there are things that like I didn't have context on. One of the things, we good? Yeah. One of the things the book really gives some clarity on is things like the emerald mine, things that are kind of BS, but you don't know the real details behind them. And so Walter Isaacson goes through kind of what the details were. I'm going to kind of gloss over it here if you don't know, but basically Elon's father somehow got involved with, it seems like a pretty shady like emerald mine. I don't think it was in South Africa. I think it was in another country. But he was basically flying the emeralds out to other places. And so it seems like it was a pretty kind of illegal deal. And so he was making some money with that at the time. And then in the early 80s, I think like Germany developed a way to make lab emeralds. And then the value of the emeralds he had access to just plummeted. So, it was kind of like worthless. So, like, did Elon have some emeralds? Yes. Were they worth anything? Not really. I think his first wife, he, gave an emerald necklace to and was like, yeah, my dad's got an emerald mine. But also he was in his 20s, and that's the kind of thing you would say to a pretty girl when you're in your 20s, even if the emerald mine doesn't really have any value. And so, now there's, people, like apartheid boy and, emerald mine, emerald, wealth and all that. And it's, he was a child in South Africa, not really contributing to the apartheid movement or anything like that. But I've noticed a couple, I'm going to talk about this a little later, but there's a couple chapters kind of setting up his parents and grandparents toward the beginning. And I've seen articles, because anything Elon or Tesla or SpaceX is total clickbait, suggesting that because in the book his grandfather seemed to be pretty racist, at least in his motivations of why they left Canada and moved to South Africa. The assumption is that, well, if his grandfather was racist, surely that means Elon is too. And again, his father had one child, two children, I can't quite remember, with his stepdaughter, basically. And that's pretty gross. And, I've seen articles kind of, well, like, is that kind of Elon's vibe too? But, in the book, again, these things get context, and, Elon was pretty creeped out about that when it seemed like when his, essentially his stepsister, was, living with his father, he felt like they seemed to have an inappropriate interaction. No children at that time, but then after she was older, they did have a child or two, which is, in my opinion, still super icky. And that's exactly how Elon and Kimball feel about it too. Super icky. Don't do that. But in articles without context, you get this vibe that, well, his grandfather was racist. Well, his father, had, this untoward, relationship with a stepdaughter, and then eventually children with him. Surely that means Elon is too. And as someone who has grandparents, I can tell you I do not have the same beliefs as my grandparents. I do not have the same beliefs as my parents exactly. So just because there might be something bad or whatever in your lineage does not mean that is your personality. So I've seen a lot of a handful of stories came out right after the book did that kind of seemed to tie those together as like, aha, see? And, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it. Your mileage may vary. Maybe you disagree. Okay. So let's see. Okay. So the book does move along pretty quickly. Like I said, excellent interviews with friends, family, and SpaceX, Tesla, other people, employees and things, enemies, lots of people. And it's all, he's got a very good notes section, details all the interviews he did with people. All that's in the back of the book. So I felt like it was pretty good, well researched. And he does a good job of presenting the stories without inserting much of his opinion. Occasionally he will, but he'll also mark it as his opinion. We'll get more into that too. Another topic that got clarity was the Starlink Ukraine situation, where they donated a bunch of Starlinks to Ukraine, and the idea was they would be for defense. Suddenly they're going on offense and into places where Elon didn't want them active because he didn't want to be part of a war. So they're trying to do this offensive with something that wasn't meant to be an offensive, thing. So Elon did, shut that down, but he was also in talks with, I think, the Secretary of State or someone at the State Department, during those times. And, he's kind of saying, like, why the hell am I in a war? And, I think from the outside and the way, again, it's portrayed, it comes off as, aha, evil billionaire is trying to, pull the levers of, the levers of governments. And, there's a quote, I can't remember exactly, from Gwen Shotwell, the CEO, I think, of SpaceX. I can't remember exactly what her title is, but she runs basically the day-to-day stuff. And, she was like, what the hell's going on? We gave these, to save lives and to, help hospitals and stuff, not, go out and kill people. So that does seem like it was a pretty fraught time. And I think, as we're all, on the outside going, Elon, what are you doing? You shouldn't be, dealing with things in a war. He's on the inside going, what am I here doing, in things of war? That's not what these were for. So there's a little clarity there, and it seems like the solution, and he's talked about this a little bit recently, was that basically the government, the U.S. government, has purchased some of the Starlink satellites. And so they're doing a Defense Department version of Starlink that they can kind of handle those kind of issues if they come up, where, it seems from the book, it seems like Elon doesn't want that, responsibility or power or really to have anything to do with any, offensive, thing that could be killing people, and, leave that up to governments and basically leave them out of it. So I would say if you're interested in that, that's another reason for reading the book, is get some context. You might not like my take on it. You might read it, have a completely different take. But there's that. There's also the emeralds, the Ukraine stuff, and there was one other big, well, I guess kind of Twitter in all. One thing I think the book kind of falls into, and it kind of makes sense because this is the time that Walter Isaacson was shadowing Elon for a number of occasions. Where I think the book kind of falls short is it kind of races up to the last couple of years, and then has a real recency bias of the Twitter stuff takes a lot of chapters. There's a lot of stuff there, but it's pretty much the least interesting thing Elon does, in my opinion. So it gives you context of how he runs a business, how he has planned to turn around a business, his motivations, his frustrations with that. But I could have done with less Twitter because it's just not a big point of interest to me. Kind of like the relationships and children thing isn't a big topic for me. And also Neuralink and Boring Company kind of get short shrift. They're mentioned, they're discussed a little bit, but I think they don't have as much of the drama that Tesla and SpaceX have. And so, they're not really mentioned. You could say Boring Company is still kind of in its, well, really both of them. I think Neuralink just got approval this week to start doing human trials. So that will be a big step, hopefully a positive one for whoever is in those trials. So you could say, they're still kind of in infancy. XAI gets a chapter, Elon's new AI venture. There is a lot of talk of AI and his concerns about it, kind of going haywire. There's stuff about Optimus, the Tesla humanoid robot. So those things kind of weave their way through his concerns about AI and where that could go. So that those companies are kind of more in their infancy. Elon says they're going to change the world, but there's no proof of that yet, or very little proof of that yet. Whereas Tesla is pretty mature, SpaceX is pretty mature, and we get a better sense of where they are and where they're going. There's also, some info on Starship development, some Solar Roof stories that are pretty frustrating to read. You get a sense of the not nice side of Elon, and I've worked in some pretty high stress situations with big deadlines. And there's a way to do it that you can be kinder. And he doesn't seem to have much of that managerial style. You do have to motivate people when you're in situations like that. And I'm sure, when he's trying to run all these companies and everything, there's more pressure. And if if something can be done or should be able to be done in a couple days and someone's telling you weeks, that's very frustrating. So he's got a pretty ruthless, I would say awful managerial style. It seems like some employees have learned to push through it or know how to deal with it. But it seems like you have to know all your facts and figures and everything about what he might potentially ask you in any meeting and be prepared to just give it at the drop of a hat. And there is a place for urgency and a place for pushing people beyond where they think they can go. And there's a value to that. I think there are better ways to motivate people. But I have also not got the results in my life that he has. So, it's a tough. If you read the book, you'll see many situations where, someone is fired abruptly, or just given hell at one meeting, and then the next morning, they've stayed up all night, figured out the problem, meet with Elon, and Elon doesn't even remember having the conversation, where he yelled at him, and yelled at people. And I think, that kind of ties back to some of his father's behavior, where he would just, belittle someone and tell them they're an effing idiot and things like that. And, that seems to come right from his father. And Kimball talks quite a bit about that, of, trying to steer him away from those tendencies. But, Elon has, is also talked about in the book as, saying, we need to get this done. This has to happen. And if people don't know their stuff, they need to know their stuff or they shouldn't be here. We need people who are going to go the extra mile. And he attracts people like that. And, there was, through my, 20s and 30s, I worked that way a lot. So I definitely see a value of, well, if we have to stay up all night, we have to stay up all night. And we're just going to, we're going to do that and get it done and, get on to the next thing because stuff has to get done. But even the way I worked, I don't know if I would have been able to handle working directly with Elon. I'm also not smart enough. But it's pretty. Some of the scenes and interviews and things are pretty harrowing as far as how he treats people, and that is really unfortunate. And you see some of that on Twitter. And yeah, I definitely do not approve of that stuff. So I will. Sorry. Yeah, I'll leave that there for now. But just that stuff is in there, and it's hard to read. Because when someone is doing great things on the grand scale and treating someone like a jerk person, it's really, really frustrating. Let's see. And that, there's some stories of, the development of the solar roof. That are pretty awful, and then that's happening at some of the homes in Starbase, and meanwhile there's a they need a new top for a tank or something, and they say they can't get the tools to get the right measurements, for another week or something like that. And Elon's like, no, we're doing it by dawn. And they're like, we can't do it by dawn. And he's like, you're going to do it by dawn. We're going to do it by dawn. And so they, cut a piece out, bend it, weld it, whatever. And it wasn't done by dawn, but it was done by 9. And they had it figured out. So, there is a place for pushing people to do things they don't believe they can do. There's a little bit about a couple chapters about the Twitter files, which I've talked about on the live streams before, which I think were pretty big yawn fests. They were essentially, they all boiled down to a private company was doing things a way that they are allowed to do, but Elon didn't like. So he bought the company and changed the way the private company does things. And then, did all these stories, the Twitter files of, see what they did? And everything was just kind of like, well, yeah, if you don't like that, don't run your company that way. But, they were free to do what they chose to do, whether you agree with it or not. That's kind of how that works. So I thought that stuff was pretty boring and, not terribly interesting. Again, people have very varying opinions on that. There are several examples in the book where Elon is wrong, and someone presents him with new evidence, and he changes his mind, which doesn't seem possible given all we've talked about. Or in retrospect, he looks back and says, yeah, that was a mistake. But he kind of has this attitude of, we're going to we're going to eliminate, 50% of the parts or 80% of the parts. And if we don't have to add 10% back, we didn't take enough away. So there's this just keep pushing and go further than you think. And then once you realize you need to go back a little bit, go back a little, but you've already cut out this other, 60%. And again, there's value to working that way. He moved some servers from Sacramento to Portland or something, and it was going to take 6 months or 8 months or something like that. And they just loaded a bunch up, in a U-Haul and started shipping them up to Portland. And, it worked. They got them all. They all plugged in. But because the software was still pointing to Sacramento, a lot of functions, when Twitter was really buggy at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, that was because they were having to repatch some of the stuff that he just impulsively unplugged. And so, did he get it moving faster than the several month time frame? Yes. Was it a mistake, and should he have pushed for a more reasonable but still accelerated time frame? Yes. So, and now in retrospect, he says that was a mistake. So, I think, he's said some things in the past about, you're always a little wrong. The goal is to be less wrong. And so I think there are moments and signs of that in the book. So, like I said, overall, definitely, if you're a fan or a detractor of Elon, I feel like this is pretty well researched. You're going to get context. Might not change your opinion, didn't really change mine, but you'll get some context. At the end of, in the acknowledgments, Walter Isaacson says, that there's a Elon told me to talk to anyone I wanted to, friends, foes, family. So I think you do get a pretty well-rounded picture of things. In some cases you might take somebody's side, other times you might take Elon's side, or whatever throughout the years. But in Walter Isaacson's conclusion, he talks a little bit about the comparison to Steve Jobs, and do you have to be? Well, I think it's actually in the introduction is a quote from Elon from his Saturday Night Live gig. There's parts about that too. The Met Galas, all that kind of stuff. I can't talk about all of it because we'd be here forever. But on stage that day, he said to anyone I've offended, I just want to say I reinvented electric cars and I'm sending people to Mars in a rocket ship. Did you think I was also going to be a chill, normal dude? I thought that was a little bit funny. My wife thought it was eye-rolling. But then the intro also has a quote from Steve Jobs that the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And so that kind of sums up, he does do a little bit of a conclusion. He kind of just leaves the stories there, like I said, without much context. He does jump in at one point and talk about, the Twitter files, and kind of had the same reaction as I did, is like, you might think there's a big, secret, scary plot here, but really it's just, a company did something you didn't like that they did. And there's not much more to it than that. I've kind of talked a little bit in the beginning about the comparison to Steve Jobs, about, if he were still alive, or if you've read Walter Isaacson's biography on him, would you get the same vibe of like an ultra jerk that gets great results? And I think, after a few days, I finished the book on Monday or Tuesday. And I kind of feel, after thinking about it for a while, that the whole book is a subtle warning not to end up like his father, who is now like deep in conspiracy world, resentful. And, the book is almost like pleading in a way, listen to Kimball and the people who have actually have his actual best interests in heart, not the, when he was buying Twitter, I think most people could see this is going to be a bad deal. And in the book, you can see people all around him are like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And, some of it, he kind of got trapped into buying it, but he put himself in that position. And, in my Twitter feed at the time, me and some other people were, kind of like, don't do this. Like, why don't buy Twitter? Don't be on Twitter more than you already are. And you had a lot of other people who were like, yeah, dude, do it. It would be hilarious. Like, whoa, like, yeah. And just kind of, there are a lot of people online on Twitter who either like blindly support anything he does, or just want to, like, just doing it for the lulz, it would be hilarious if he did that. Oh man, can you believe it? And, egg him on. And I think that kind of plays to some of his worst instincts. But anyway, a lot of this stuff, he puts himself in a bad position. And then, there's talk about the FSD will be ready next year. That's a theme again in the book. And how, it's still not here. And it talks about the progress and some of the things, but and some of the new approaches. So if you want the last, relatively up-to-date info, that's all in there. Cybertruck design, robotaxi design, all that stuff is in there. But he makes these pronouncements, and he may actually really believe them, but it puts him in a bad spot. It's better to keep your mouth shut. I don't know if he has that filter. So toward the end, again, Walter Isaacson's conclusion is, kind of goes back to that Steve Jobs quote, is it worth all of the personal berating and the difficult to work with to get these big projects moving and accelerating faster than anyone thought they could. If you don't follow Tesla and SpaceX, like rocket boosters are landing on ships all the time, like a couple a week. And we just think that's normal now. And, 10 years ago, that was, science fiction. It wasn't ever going to happen. The EV revolution would not be happening nearly as quickly if not for Tesla, raising the bar, pushing, having enough production to actually get the other manufacturers to move their butts. We're seeing this with the supercharger network, where everybody is now wanting to have access to the supercharger network. Well, that kind of thing takes foresight. It has to, having the knowledge of, hey, our electric cars aren't going to sell if people can't use them like cars. And especially, I've done lots of videos on it. My last video included, like, if you're in the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, northern, western Minnesota, if you're going to drive an EV, it has to be a Tesla if you're going to move like regular people do. And so now, the supercharger network is opening up, not because it's maybe necessarily a great deal for Tesla, although they, will qualify for some incentives and things like that, but, and they'll get better utilization, but really it makes other manufacturers' cars much more appealing. And, the Fords and GMs were not about to, they say they have a charging network, that what they have is a bunch of, partners that are a hodgepodge, and they go, look, our network. And it's not real. It's not fast. In some areas of the country it might be, but here in the Midwest, it's not. So, can you ignore that minutia, the day-to-day, to get these big human achievements rolling? And that's tough. I think, like I said, it would be tough to have to work in that environment, at least until you know how to deal with it. It seems like some people he works with are really good at tuning out the nonsense and just like, what are the things I need to know? Or, being ready and prepared to meet with him and give him information or context for decisions. So there's another theme that kind of plays out. It's more a high-level theme. It's only pointed to a couple times in the book, is, and I don't think people actually believe this, and I don't think Walter did either going into this, and that there's an earnestness. And, when Elon is trying to solve these big problems, he is trying to solve these big problems. There's a lot of assumption that it's all for monetary gain and a big drag. People talk about billionaires just being dragons, sitting on these giant stacks of money. Well, all his money is in these companies, and reinvesting in these companies and things to try to get these big things accomplished. And Walter talks about this, the comic books he read as a child and Elon read as a child, where the heroes are trying to do good for humanity. They aren't perfect, but they're trying to do these big feats and save the world. And Elon kind of sees his projects as trying to save the world. Again, you might have a different opinion, but that's, after, following Elon through many channels myself since 2018, that's pretty much the sense I get. Like, the money that he has goes into, trying to solve these big problems. And, hang on. Just want to, there might be a flow with the stream. Okay, that's, okay. But the earnestness that, if we push really hard, we can solve these big problems and actually do it. I don't think a lot of people believe that can be a motivation and that it must be money. And some people just aren't wired that way. Like, money is, whatever. I think that's why he doesn't mind taking risks with it, with his PayPal money, putting that into SpaceX and Tesla, and not wanting to focus on one or the other because they both need to be done. So, we got to get them through the 2008s and, things like that. And so it seems like, with all Elon's faults, Walter came to find that there is that earnestness of, on a broad scale, we need to solve these big problems, and it'll only happen if we push hard to do it. So what are my thoughts on Elon after reading this? I would say that my thoughts haven't really changed too much. I mostly agree with Walter's assessment of him. He's a giant jerk doing important stuff. And part of the problem with Elon is that he is so out in the open and so transparent. He might be wrong, but he is so transparent and he is so clickable from a media standpoint. Tesla is, everything's a Tesla killer, in the media for the last 10 years. And, even the UAW, there are articles about the strike going on with Ford, Stellantis, and GM about how this is really because of Elon and Tesla. And it's like, well, those other companies had the opportunity to make EVs 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Like, how is this him? It's him, it's about him and Tesla because they aren't union facilities. So, it's just anything he does or says, gets amplified and, pigeonholed into different things. He's said and done a whole bunch of crappy things. I'm not, definitely not downplaying that. But like I said, I think the book gives some good context to things. And I think, like I said, I used to work in corporate events, and you would get to see different executives from various companies in rehearsals with their teams. As you're walking by, they're having like a little leadership meeting on the side of the stage or whatever, or on a trade show floor, or as a video editor, sometimes I'd have to edit their message to their teams. And so you hear them in the off-camera parts where things are still rolling, and there are a lot of CEOs of a lot of companies that you may or may not really agree with in a personal capacity. Now, most of them aren't as public-facing, or they might make a public comment and nobody cares because it's the company of, like it's Bob's company, and it's not a volatile stock, it's not a meme, it's there's no 420 jokes or whatever. Or like one business publication might do a half column story on it, and nobody cares. So I know there are a lot of people who are like, I'd never buy a Tesla, never do. I would never buy anything that Elon touches, never do Starlink, never. And I get that, your values are your values, and that's totally understandable. But, as we talk about Elon's flaws, his management style, his, kind of zone out berating that he gets into, I think it's important to have the discussion, at least, of how much of that is trauma related from childhood. Like we talk, we put that in a bucket and set it aside. Now it's time to bring that bucket out again. How much of that is neurodivergence, showing up, and a lack of empathy, things like that. And do we just stop affording someone who's dealing with those things, do we stop affording them consideration because they have a lot of money? Maybe that's up for debate. Maybe, if you have a lot of money, you should, take the time to do excessive, therapy to get, more on a manageable level, for the sake of your, direct reports or something. There is a lot of good business strategy stuff in there if you're into that kind of thing too. The way he meets with people, again, not the behavior necessarily, but the way of sifting through and getting to the point of issues, and taking care of them quickly, is important. So like I was kind of saying with other CEOs and other companies are made up of more than their CEO. And if you believe in climate change, if you believe that, we should be, reusing things instead of just dumping every space thing into the ocean, if you believe, the goal of preserving consciousness, maybe going to Mars and, having people on Mars isn't the way you think it should be done. But, again, what are the other solutions? What are you personally doing about it? When you look at these big problems, I won't buy a Tesla because I'm waiting for the perfect thing, or, all cities to be walkable or whatever. While you're waiting for those perfect solutions, what are you doing? Should we stop buying and burning oil and putting more of that into our atmosphere? What are the steps we can take, even if our cities or states or countries aren't doing big things as fast as we would like them to, Do we just sit and wait for the perfect thing, or do we do the incremental things to make a change and show a demand for a change? You know, if you don't like Tesla because of Elon, again, that's fine if that's your choice. And you say you like Ford, you like Jim Farley's approach. I think, as far as I can tell, since Herbert Diess left VW, Jim Farley is doing by far the best at transitioning Ford to an EV maker and everything. They're making great strides. At the same time they're doing that, they just had an event last week showing off the new F-150s and how great these new gas vehicles are, these new diesel vehicles are. That's their bread and butter, as they're, saying we're all in on EVs. They're, continuing to build and promote, and the UAW is fighting for the ICE car jobs because they need a lot more people to make those. There's more parts. And so, people should have, I'm not completely against the strikes, don't get me wrong. I think people should have a living wage. I think there should be a good deal. But I think there is a definite, bias there against, we don't want to go to EVs because jobs will be lost in that process. And I totally understand that. But you also, we moved to refrigerators and people stopped getting ice deliveries. Progress should and still does happen, and we need to work our way through it. Elon's talked, and it's actually in the book too, about universal basic income a little bit, because if these Optimus robots can do dangerous, tedious factory work, then, what is an economy at that point if labor isn't really involved? So universal basic income is probably something that's going to have to be dealt with in the next few years, next decade or whatever. But, people should start thinking about it now instead of just reactionary. So, like VW, okay, I love their EVs because they're not Elon. Well, Electrify America, VW's push into EVs is all kind of fueled out of Dieselgate, where they were having way, like 26 times or more, like the amount of pollution you should have coming out of your vehicles. So, like, do you go to them because there are reasons as you look at, like Toyota hybrids, great, but they're also actively campaigning against the switch to EVs and pushing things like hydrogen, which are just not going to work. I'm not going to get into that here because this is already going long, but you have, you can take almost every company and say, like even Hyundai Kia, who are doing, I think, a great job in their EV offerings. There's still, there's still plenty of Tucsons on the lot, and GM's going to come out with a Silverado. They came out with a Hummer, which is kind of a hilarious EV, but like it was a big show without a lot of numbers and doesn't really help people transition. The Bolt was great, but it had slow charging and now is going away for a little while. So you kind of have to pick your poison of like, what car company do you go with? Elon's bad, Dieselgate's bad, still, selling and promoting, giant gas guzzlers, that's bad. Everybody's got to make those choices for themselves. And I don't I don't really begrudge anyone for making the choices for the best for their situation. We need cheaper EVs. We need more used EVs on the market. I think Kyle Connor's dad is doing his darndest to get more used EVs on the road. If you follow Out of Spec Dave, you know why. But the there are problems, but the most robust ecosystem right now for getting people into EVs is Tesla and the supercharger network, in my opinion. And the faster Tesla can produce vehicles, the faster other companies switch to NACS and get use of the supercharger network, that's going to be the driver that really changes things, because Tesla has, like them or not, been day in and day out putting chargers out into the world. They just passed 50,000 globally, and no one else is close to that for fast, reliable charging when you're on the road. Look at any of my road trips. There have been almost... I can't even remember the last time I had to switch stalls because one was bad. I just don't think about it. If I didn't do YouTube, you would never hear me talk about charging because, well, I wouldn't be on YouTube. But also, it's not a thing I ever think about. I get in the car, say I'm going here. It tells me if I need to stop, or I know because it's a route I've done before, and I don't worry about it. So, one other trait of, we kind of talked about this, how, like Elon doesn't remember a conversation that just happened, or at least that he berated someone. That's definitely a sign of siloed thinking of and you'll see this, I think some of his bad tweets are just really bad tweets, where he's getting opinions or information from, again, people who really don't have his best interests in mind. And he doesn't necessarily have the shut-off valve to not send those. But some of them are him, when you watch for it, he's solving a problem in the moment without broader context. And I think that kind of goes to his engineering problem-solving methodology of, well, here's a problem. I'm going to solve it. I don't think we should do this. It's like, okay, well, maybe in a complete vacuum, that makes total sense. And a lot of this is, on certain social things, but, like in a vacuum, that statement makes sense. But there's much broader context that you're not bringing to it. And so when you make that statement, everybody is going to jump on you, and a billion articles will be written about it, and you're going to be a monster because you said this one thing, and there's a broad context, but you're thinking in a vacuum about this one single thing. I think that gets him into trouble a lot. I also think, I don't know if you've ever seen the old Fleischer Superman cartoons. They're awesome. Really, I think they're from 38 or early 40s or something. But there's always, the mad scientist, and he's mad at the world, and he's got this death ray coming in. And I think that somehow that's kind of how some people think of Elon, and kind of a danger if he doesn't take some of these warnings from Isaacson's book, or, maybe listen to someone who's a little more even keel, like Kimball seems to be. it's always, the evil scientist on the mountain has got the death ray pointed at the city. And it's like, the fools, they wouldn't listen. And now I'm going to have my revenge. And I think there are people who see him that way, but also you can kind of see the danger of him. I think that's some people's reaction to the Ukraine situation was, him playing God over affairs of the world. And I think, again, from the context of the book and, my read on different statements, is the, like, how am I even in this situation? Like, I don't want this. Maybe he's fooling us all. Maybe, in the 2 years Walter Isaacson hung with him, maybe completely fooled him the whole time, and he's, the best actor in the world. But I thought Walter Isaacson gave him a really fair shake, was critical, and showed bad behavior, but also showed humanity and, like I said, that earnestness to really try to do good, and we should try to do good as fast as we can. But sometimes that burns a lot of bridges. So, worth a read. One final thought, and then I'll get into the comments. I see there are super chats, so thank you for that. In reading some of the other books, in the book about Einstein, E equals MC squared, he's brilliant, he's doing all these things, mathematical genius, other, strange personal life stuff as well. But toward the end of Einstein's life, actually, I'm not sure how many years it spans. It's been a while since I read this. But toward the end of Einstein's life, he was searching for a unified field theory in physics. And he was convinced it was there. He was convinced he could find it. There's was wild debates at the time of whose theory of the universe is right, and now there's all sorts of things, string theory and a bunch of things I can't remember because I don't follow physics that closely. But I kind of wonder another danger. Pitfall, I guess I'll say, that Elon could fall into, and maybe with one of these companies he has or will, is that looking for that unified field theory and not being able to get off the one thing that, maybe if he wasn't so focused on that, he could have done better good, more good in another avenue. Now, maybe that's Twitter. We'll see how X shapes up over the next couple of years. But, had he not bought Twitter, could there be a better thing, another thing? I guess that's kind of, if you choose path A, is there something better on path B? But, I think it will be interesting to follow. Elon's not that much older than me, so I don't know if I'll follow his whole life and everything. But, I wonder, is there a unified field theory out there that Elon is chasing or will be chasing that will turn out to be, not the right path? So that will be interesting to see. A flawed person like we all are. Again, how much do you give consideration to, the things of the past or the things that, are still a part of him. That's for everybody to judge for themselves, and how, you treat people like that in your own life. I don't know. I am perfectly comfortable being generally a fan, but also completely irate about some of the things he says and does. Frustrated with some things from some of the companies, maybe. Not generally too bad. I give, some of the things that come up on Twitter, and, somebody's like, oh, that should be a retrofit, or that should be this way, or that should be that way. No company is going to get everything right all the time. I don't generally get too worked up about that stuff. I think if there's a big enough outcry on some things, they'll change course, or sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll be right, sometimes they'll be wrong. But that's with any company. I think there's a lot of hysteria on Twitter and, in the Tesla world of, Elon did this to me. And it's like, did Elon dictate that, or did some middle manager, make a decision you don't like? There's questions. When Elon was buying Twitter, I swear I'll get to your comments in a minute. When Elon was buying Twitter, there were mass waves of mass exodes, mass exits from Twitter just when it was announced he was on the board. Oh, I'm leaving Twitter. He's awful. And then, okay, now he's actually made a proposal to buy Twitter. Oh, I'm leaving Twitter. Goodbye. It was good. It was so wonderful here. And, now it's going to be terrible. And then when he bought it, there was in the book, they describe, just an explosion of bots and terrible hate speech and stuff launched like right away when he bought it. There were no changes. It wasn't like all of a sudden they let all these people on. It was just, the general bot problem exploded in that way to set that message, out into the Twitter world. Everybody who, was worried that Elon was going to turn it into that kind of place, suddenly, like, all right, I'm out of Twitter forever. You still see, waves of, somebody doesn't like this thing, somebody doesn't like that thing. We're all leaving. Maybe they will. I've had my moments where I've wanted to leave there. Maybe I will. I don't know. That's another topic for another day, but it still is in my corner of X Twitter. It's still mostly EV talk. It's still mostly helpful, friendly people who I consider friends, even though many of them I've not met in real life. So, I kind of think you get what you search for. And I think that's the way it is on all social media. So we'll see. That's another topic for another day. But that's my very long review of Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk. Thank you for joining for this. I'm going to move over to the other camera and get to all your comments and chats. Thank you so much for your patience. I know it wasn't super interactive before now, but just wanted to hammer through all that because it's a pretty long book, but it's good, and I do recommend people pick it up and read it. Again, I think Walter Isaacson does a really good job on his biographies, and if you don't, let me know why, either in the chat or the comments. Let's move over to the other camera. I got to do that over there. Someday I'll figure out how I set all this stuff up. All right. Camera B, hello. Welcome. Okay. I'll skip the hellos, but hello everybody. John says, I worship everyone who's got money. I don't know that that's true. It's a funny thing to say, though. Virgil just says he's just started reading the book. Can't wait, or can't watch till done, so I don't mess it up for him. Well, that's good. It was nice of him to stop by, but AZ just says he picked it up today. Yeah, it's definitely worth a read. I don't think I gave any major spoilers. There's a lot of details and things in there that I glossed over. Steve, sorry you missed the notification. I kind of just threw this up this afternoon, and I finished reading the book on, I think, Monday morning, and I've just kind of been stewing on it all week and thought, before it gets too old news, I want to put this out there. Hey, Roland, thanks for stopping by. John says, look at your text link. Okay, that was him texting me. It's about an adapter. I'm going to skip that topic for now. That might be a thing we get into in another live stream. Todd and John are just talking. John says those people are jealous. Elon Musk came from the dirt pits. Do I think Elon has ADHD? Possibly. I'm not real sure on the diagnosis of that kind of stuff. I guess if that was diagnosed, it wouldn't surprise me. John's the CEO and senior director for Denmar in Brooklyn Park. CEO is just a stupid name. I'm King John. Nice. Techno King. John won't buy a Tesla because it farts. Nice. Don't you think it's a lot of jealousy going on? Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there's also almost a need for people to misunderstand him. Again, can be a complete jerk, but some of the stories I read or headlines I read really go out of their way to mischaracterize things because it's sensational and it gets clicks. Now, Elon pointed that out, and Earl of Frunkpuppy on X said, wait, isn't that how you get impressions on X? So, yeah. Tim, hello. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. I know that was a long ramble with no breaks for comments, but just wanted to get the review out as quickly as I could. That turned out to not be super quick, but John, thank you very much for the $5 super sticker. Appreciate that. Character looking really impressed, saying, whoa. I'll add that to broadcast because I always think the descriptions that show up in my software are as funny or funnier than the actual character themselves. I'm sure you guys were able to see that in the chat. I will check my phone here. Sorry I have so much painting stuff in the background. I'm, like I said, doing a big project this September that I can't really share until it's done. Um, this is... I'll show you this. A to Z EV thunderstorm plug. John, is this the thing they were talking about on the Batteries Included podcast this morning? I haven't. I watched that, but I didn't. I had it kind of on in the background as I was doing art things. So I heard Tom Moloughney talking about, waiting to get more safety info from them, but I don't know really much else about it. But it is 11 p.m. and I kind of want to keep this one mostly just tidy on the book focus. So I'm going to wrap it up here. John, thanks for the super chat. I appreciate that. I know it's a weird time to come on. I usually don't do Fridays. But like I said, it just kind of hit me this morning that this was the place to be. One other thing I wanted to point out, that the Twins clinched the division tonight. So if you were here watching this instead of watching that, thank you. Very kind of you. But we're in the playoffs. We'll see how we do. See how the injuries pan out. Steve says, I agree that it takes his kind of tenacity to move EVs from dream to reality. Yeah, and where would we be if the Model 3 hadn't made it through production hell? Yeah, I don't think the Model S and X would have ever been able to give enough pressure to the other auto manufacturers to stop doing the promise thing and start actually making real vehicles. The Model 3 being a success, the Model S showed that it could be done, but it didn't move anybody's will other than we'll have EVs in 5 years, we'll have EVs in 10 years. Yeah, we're going to do it, which was still kind of the attitude ever since GM crushed the EV1. And, having the Model 3 actually succeed, and that is one amazing thing, as brutal and awful as he can be, you really get a sense of the production hell that it took to make Model 3 a success. The book is very descriptive of that, and that's a testament to Walter Isaacson's interview skills with other people. So it's not just Elon's story, it's other people talking about how they perceived those times. Like I said, I've been through a few major, well, it's not the same as auto production, but some big events that we had to pull off miracles to get them done. And when people get really frustrated about the Cybertruck being late, about FSD being late, about different things, I've been in meetings where I said we can get this done in X number of days, and then one thing happens and it changes everything, and it makes it suddenly you're a liar. Well, no, something came out of the blue, something we couldn't have anticipated until we got to that step happened. And, you have to work through the night to figure it out, to fix it, to find a workaround. You have to be creative and tenacious. When you have a deadline and clients are expecting, you have to find a way to make it work. So like I said, I don't have the same experience, the technical know-how, anything, but I've been in situations where suddenly you look like a fool and a liar because something no one could have anticipated happened. At one of my workplaces, this didn't really affect timelines, but it's the kind of stuff that just can happen out of the blue. At one of my last workplaces, we were all working in our offices one afternoon, and suddenly a semi jumped the berm in front of the building, smashed into 6 cars. Luckily, no one was in the parking lot, or, they would have been killed instantly. But that, just threw, everything into turmoil. That afternoon completely changed. Luckily, the driver wasn't injured. We think he fell asleep coming down the hill and something. But like you can't plan, like you don't plan for those. Maybe you should, but how many of those, weird situations can you plan for? But, suddenly everybody went to, this is my normal life, to, well, even my car, they even totaled my car, which didn't have that much damage, but it was worth more than the value at the time. And so suddenly everybody goes from, what they had planned to, 5 people need new cars instantly. My car was the last one impacted. And so it was kind of a debate with the insurance company of, do we fix it, do we not fix it? But luckily, that wasn't the Tesla. So, but just weird stuff happens, and you can have all the right plans in place, all the right, people, and then someone gets sick. Producing things is very difficult. I did a little bit of software stuff, with working on some games for events and stuff. And when you're doing a coding thing, which I'm absolutely not an expert in, you put a comma where there should be a period or a bracket instead of a parenthesis, and then you got to go back through and find it when stuff doesn't work. It's just, I don't think the average person has a real appreciation for how difficult stuff is. And that's the case for every brand, making EVs. This is a new ball game. And, people are trying to figure it out. John, thanks for the super chat there. Pair character stretching his arm forward, raising his thumb up. Excellent. On the other computer, I can actually see what that looks like. Tomorrow there is for Minnesota people, there is a car show tomorrow. There's actually a what is it called? A competition where people scavenger hunt, where people hunt for scavengers. There's actually a scavenger hunt going on in Minnesota right now from Drive Electric Minnesota statewide scavenger hunt. And I think I thought Blue Alien Chicken showing approval. So close. Nice. We can see there's Todd. There's me doing our selfies. And I think, somebody knocked Todd out of first place. I'm in third. But there's a scavenger hunt going from through this week for National Drive Electric Week, where if you go through to Drive Electric Minnesota, you can participate in the scavenger hunt, and it goes to October 1st. And I don't really know exactly what it's going to entail. Today it was a couple trivia questions and take a selfie with a level 2 charger. So we'll see what tomorrow's challenges bring. But yeah, Todd moved down to second place. He got all the questions right, so somebody must have just been quicker on the draw. And then I'm going to try to find that event that John is talking about. Let's see if we can show you that. Just listen to me breathe and think. What a horrible thing to ask people to do. Events. So tomorrow there are 2 events in Minnesota. There is Electra Fun in Faribault at 10 a.m. I will show you guys the second screen. We will go and walk around and talk to people and take pictures of cars. John, I've not heard about the event in Duluth. They had an event last week that was just a quick get-together. It was all Duluth folks and then Joan and I. So, I mean, it was fun. It was a good, nice hangout, but I think we're the only ones that drove up for it. I don't know if they're even going to do the other event. But with that, I am going to take off because we're almost at the 2-hour mark here. And I really appreciate everyone joining. Thanks for sticking through it. Like I said, I do recommend the book, even if you're not an Elon fan. It'll kind of help you sort out the wheat from the chaff, and maybe get a little better appreciation of some of the behind the scenes stuff. But parts of it will make you want to tear your hair out at what a colossal jerk he can be. So anyway, with that, thank you for joining. Have a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Thank you very much. And John, thanks for the super stickers. Good night, everybody. Thank you. Bye.